Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
Well, I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And we'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Today in the Voice of Yoga, we will talk about the concept of hope as an interference pattern to the divine idea, therefore an obstacle to the truth of being. In this show, we will talk about the entry level of human consciousness, which must be developed. Listen as we explore hope, faith, and charity as levels of consciousness cultivated by union with the divine. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and be a transparency for divine truth. So I see the title of today's show is Hope is Not an Action Plan. Let's talk more about that.
Yeah, I'd like to start by beginning to understand the terms faith, hope, and charity. I'd begin by changing the order: hope, faith, and love. I like to put hope on the same level as belief. Belief is the world of make-believe, the mental material concept. And for me now, hope is what believers do, and some strive for it. For those living in darkness, hope is a ray of light, and as John told us, the light shines in darkness, and the darkness comprehends it not. As mortals, we believe in God, and we believe in evil. We believe in sickness, suffering, disease, and death. But if we believe in God and know God aright, which means no opposite, then this belief will grow into faith. I like what Paul told us about this in Hebrews 11:1. And I'll read 1 to 3. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained a good report. Through faith, we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that things which are seen were not made of things which do appear. End of quote. All right, so he gives us a lot of symbolism here. And for me, the elders are the ones who no longer believe in the testimony of the corporeal senses. They are the seers. They see the divine creation. What we see with the corporeal senses isn't what is really there. Only the divine creation is everywhere always.
So when he's saying faith is the substance of things hoped for, is he talking about the divine idea, like what we wish for, what we pray for?
Well, this is what I'd like to talk about, this idea of hoping. When do we hope? I hope things work out. I hope I get a raise. We hope when we don't know what's going on. And this idea of faith, because in her book, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, Mary Baker Eddy kind of lays out a progression. We graduate from belief to faith. And Paul substantiates that here. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Faith is when whatever it is that you're believing in begins to materialize. It externalizes in experience. And so that's what gives us our proof, how we can start to test what it is we're calling truth. What is it that I'm conscious of? Because if you start with a principle and you understand that spirit is a demonstrable principle, now you have something that you can work with. And if you know that divine truth and consciousness will dispel anything that doesn't have divine qualities, now that principle can be applied.
Swami, you said earlier, then this belief will grow into faith. So I think what you're saying is we have to have belief first, and then, as you said, grows into faith. I think we have to be careful what we are believing in. Like, we don't want to believe in Santa Claus. So can you just dive a little bit deeper into this?
Yeah, that's what we're talking about. This idea of belief in the divine principle, believing in God. And then, of course, knowing God aright. Because in order for this to work, we have to graduate to understanding, which means we must know God aright. We can't believe in a God that is a mix of good and evil, a God that punishes and rewards. That creates this conflict. It's a contradiction. And that's one of the reasons why Orthodox religion fails today, because they don't have a principle. What makes Christian Science so powerful is they have a principle and a rule. And in order for us to really start to demonstrate the principle, we have to know the rule. And it's like anything else. It's like you're trying to attach your printer to your computer. There's things that have to be in place in order for all the connections to be made so that from your computer you can now print. But a lot of times you find that it's pretty difficult to attach the printer to the computer. And so you have to work at it. And the same here with divine science. The principle is the allness of the Creator. This divine principle is all. And it's complex. It's made up of these different attributes: principle, soul, life, love, mind, truth, and spirit. In yoga, we break that down into chakras: Muladhara, Svadhisthana, Manipuraka, Anahata, Vishuddha, Ajna, Sahasrara. And in Revelations, they break that down into churches: Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. This idea of spirit, the one light, being divided into 7 different colors. We get that example when you put white light through the prism, and it breaks off into 7 colors. And now we're at a level of color, and we're trying to reverse engineer this whole thing. And so working with things like faith, hope, and love can be helpful if you understand how they work, if you believe in the divine principle, and you do what would be considered the preparatory work. In a couple of our shows, we talked about the resurrection of Lazarus and the symbolism that's found there. The sisters write Jesus, which is a metaphor for the mind-body complex seeking the divine self. There's this innate drive in all of us. We want to be whole. We want to be complete. And then the mental material concept plays a part in this. That's why I really like the Kriya Yoga that we teach, because we work with ourselves physically, mentally, conceptually, and we prepare the mind-body complex for this separation from being individualized from the world mind, and now making a hospitable environment to internalize the invisible, intangible, divine omnipresence as your new symbol for validation. That inner marriage, that union, is what yoga is all about. But it's also what Christianity is all about. When Jesus said, "Unless a man be born again of water and the Spirit, he shall not know the kingdom of heaven." This isn't new information, but it's missing. It's lost because we don't have good leadership.
I think it's interesting when you had said what we see with the corporeal senses isn't what is really there. And a lot of us are going to look out with our eyes and say, well, it looks real to me. So how do we get past that?
Well, initially you have to know that to be true. If you don't believe that the testimony of your material senses is the lie, then you're never going to get beyond belief. Because like we say, we can believe in anything. But it's really not until matter and mind come together with the divine principle do we impregnate the seed of consciousness. And in that union is where the progressive cycle begins to grow, because you are no longer the branch cut off from the vine. You are back in the Father's house. And how do I know I'm in the Father's house? Well, you're starting to grow psychologically and spiritually, and your belief is growing into faith. You're able to now demonstrate the omnipresence of the perfection of the divine creation. Why? Because you're conscious of it.
All right, so we've gone over that belief can grow into faith. Let's talk now about hope. What can you tell our listeners about that?
Yeah, I looked up hope and found the anchor is the Christian symbol for hope. And as we titled this show, hope is not an action plan. Hope is more or less a last resort when we run out of options. We hope when we don't know, and we don't know because we believe in something other than the perfection of being. Life without principle, no conscious awareness of the truth of being. What we're learning is only the mortal sense of self doesn't know. The divine self is omniscient, it's omnipresent, it's omnipotent.
Swami, what is your take on why in the Bible it actually uses those terms, faith, hope, and charity? Obviously, the writers of the Bible must want us to know something about the word hope and use it correctly.
Well, for me, it's the idea of process. We begin with belief, we begin with hope, and then that will graduate into faith. And then that faith will graduate into understanding, which would be termed as charity or love. Like we talk about, love is the ultimate human experience. It's the ability to unconditionally give. But it's divine love. Divine love is designed for giving because you are connected to this inexhaustible resource. And you're never drawing back into a finite sense of self because everything that is in your consciousness, you're looking at yourself, as yourself, of yourself, to yourself. So there's never anything that gets out of divine self. And so the exchange of energy is always outward. It's pouring outward. And the idea of progression, starting with a belief, and then that belief graduates into a faith where what you believe in is now starting to externalize. Like what Mary Baker Eddy says, you live above corporeal sense and correct it. You're starting to see with this belief in this divine principle, you're exercising what in Genesis was called dominion, that you now have power over the earth. For me, that might be why Christianity uses the anchor as the symbol for hope, because with an anchor, there's really no movement. There's a use for an anchor that you can hold things in place. But for advancement, you really want to untie the boat. And a lot of times we hide behind our lack of knowledge, our inability to demonstrate a principle, and then we sit back and we hope that things will get better. And for a lot of people, that's why they turned to religion. It was what Karl Marx called the pablum of the masses. People were looking for an easy way to approach their lives. They could ask this supreme being to do things for them. And that's not entirely wrong. The idea of living by grace is available to anyone who has a willingness to give up this mortal sense of existence. But there's an exchange that happens here. And like we say, there's preparatory work that must be in place before you can do it with any degree of success.
We're going to pause right here to hear a word from our sponsor. Listeners, we'll be back with you in just a few moments. Institute for Personal Development Incorporated is a Kriya Yoga ashram offering yoga classes in all 8 stages of Kriya Yoga, including classes, personal training, teacher training, residential program, online live classes, and online products for self-discovery and transformation. Discover, learn, and practice one of the oldest and purest forms of yoga, Kriya Yoga, by uniting ancient religion with modern science. Visit www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste. Welcome back. For those who are just joining us, you are listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So I just wanted to comment that when I was younger, I was a rainbow girl, and in Rainbow we had different, what we called stations, and each station, sat one of the rainbow girls. And Faith was the station that was right next to the altar. And then to the right was Hope, and then on the other side was Charity. So the order was Faith, Hope, and Charity. I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, however you order things sometimes isn't really that important, but I just go back to what Paul said. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, which to me puts hope before faith. That you would hope that things would turn out a certain way, and then it would be your faith is what materializes that. It's what makes it manifest. I don't put too much stock, oftentimes, in procedures and things of that nature. But I always go back to what Mary Baker Eddy said. Faithful and orderly with the objects of sense makes us more receptive to the deeper things of the divine principle. So if you do have an understanding of how things are working, and you understand that the level of thought and the level of belief and the level of hope is a level of consciousness, and also something that we want to start to advance out of. We don't want to be tethered to hope. You don't want to, like we say, hope is not an action plan. You don't sit around and hope for things to get better. What we're trying to learn is, well, what are the things that we can do to induce this God experience? If the instruction is to be born again of spirit, and we don't know what that looks like when we're going to do it, and if we don't know what it is that we need to do in order to accomplish it, how is it going to get done? You sit around and you hope for it. But that's like trying to swim with an anchor. You're going to drown. I don't want to turn any of this into an academic argument or even a debate. What we're trying to do is know the truth.
So it's when we realize that hope is not an action plan, but what is an action plan for us to start following?
Yeah, how do we go about living today? And we spend most of our effort in learning, improving, protecting, acquiring things of this world instead of knowing the truth. Then again, what is the truth? And if you start with a principle, life is perfect. And somewhere in the Bible where it says we labor in vain when we build the house, you all of a sudden have a different value system. You start to see knowing this truth may be the best option you could ever undertake because of the promises that Scripture give us. Jesus said, "It is the Father within that does the work. All the Father has is thine." Or things like, "What does it profit a human to gain the whole world and lose your soul?" So you establish a different value system. You start to put this divine principle in its position of importance, the idea of putting God first. It is the core of existence. It is the ultimate experience because it's perfect, whole, complete, void of all of the complications and problems that we experience at this human level. And all we have to do is be conscious of it. We don't have to make it, but we do have to make ourselves a hospitable environment to invite it into our awareness.
So I'd like to have a discussion about how we can take this information you just gave us and how we can apply it to the upcoming holiday.
Yeah, well, what we're trying to do is graduate from this materialistic approach to this spiritual event. The birth of Christ should be more of an internal experience on an individual level, that we should be all, rather than trying to believe in something that happened 2,000 years ago and defend it. We want to start to understand that the Christ is an eternal principle. It's right here, right now, functioning, running a perfect universe. And if we were conscious of it, then all of the things that we're trying to do on a material level would be done. See, that's one of the things we haven't really graduated to. I like what Mary Baker Eddy said in Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, and I'll paraphrase it, but it's something like, "You render the divine law of healing void and obscure when you weigh the human in the same scale as the divine, or limit in any direction of thought the omnipotence and omnipresence of God." End of paraphrase. She's given us an awful lot right there to work with because we really haven't separated finite, mortal existence from immortal, eternal, spiritual identity. Until we start to understand these terms, faith, hope, and love, then change the order. You don't have faith and then hope. You have hope because you believe in something, but you're not sure if it's going to work. And you start to have faith because you're starting to see that your belief in this divine principle is starting to externalize in your experience. And then the idea of graduating from faith to understanding. The idea of love. Things are progressing. So you went to just getting a glimmer of your belief in this divine principle at the faith level, but then when you get to love, now you're demonstrating divine law with scientific certainty. Now you are a transparency for the divine creation. Like Jesus said, all the things that I do, you can do. And the reason you can do them because you are now at that level of consciousness, the level of one being. I and the Father are one.
Swami, I do have a curiosity to ask you. You have always taught about the stages of development, the caterpillar, the chrysalis, the butterfly. Can we plug in the hope, faith, and charity or love along with those same guidelines?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to do. Belief is the caterpillar. You're at that entry level of existence there. You're born in the flesh. You're individualized by the world mind. at that level of belief, everything is relatively equal. Because, like we say, you can believe in sickness, suffering, disease, lack, limitation. You believe in God. You can believe in a God that is a mix of good and evil. You're kind of at the basement of the building. And for you to start to come up into the floors of the building and increase maybe your visibility, then you have to start challenging what you're believing in. Because when we're at that level of belief, we're in the cycle of death and rebirth. We'll perpetuate this indefinitely. But if you at some point get that window of interest, you no longer want to do this anymore. I mean, it's getting very familiar to you. You want to change, then you're going to have to graduate. And one of the ways that you graduate is that you separate from being individualized by the world mind and then rejoin, relink with divine mind. And because the human mind-body complex is so complicated, you really have to test what you're doing. What I'm calling truth, that it's the one true truth. And that's where faith comes in, where now your belief in this divine principle begins to start to reveal itself. And that's not the end-all be-all, because with thought and belief, you can change finite bad to finite good. But then you'll notice there's always this chronic anxiety that is accompanying it. The fear becomes the indicator that you're still in the false sense of self. Fear is a defense mechanism for mortality. And so as we graduate, and eventually, we get to that level of love, that level of understanding. I know the truth, and it makes me free from the belief there is a second self, that there is something other than the perfection of being.
And that's when we talked about earlier, and that we would no longer see with our corporeal senses, our corporeal eyes. We actually see the divine creation.
Right. And in the Bible, when it talks about being double-minded and make thine eyes single. And so you start with a belief in the divine creation. And then if you are practicing a metaphysical, mystical system like Kriya Yoga, you're enlisting strategies that you can control your rate of breath, which then controls your rate of thought, until you can actually get yourself where you stop thinking, when you reach pratyahara, where you separate identity from the influence of the corporeal senses, and you make your mind aware for the presence of divine mind, which is invisible and intangible to corporeal sense. And in that silence and in that stillness, you're waiting on the Lord. You're watching, waiting, listening, and you're letting divine truth reveal itself to you. But as long as you're not thinking, you're not interfering with this ongoing creative principle that is pouring out its sustenance, it's pouring out spiritual substance continuously, divine idea. And it's only available for those of us that have the mind of Christ, that have stopped thinking with the material senses and are now knowing with spiritual sense.
Well, it is that time to end our program for today. Listeners, be sure to visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. When you're on any of the pages, you scroll down to the bottom and you'll see several buttons there that you can press to further your development. Swami, what are your final thoughts about today's program?
Well, I would like to encourage people to join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance, get the light in your soul, and be a transparency for divine truth. Namaste.
Thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton, along with Swami Jayananda, signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga revelation. Namaste.